We're going to look first at P1 and P2, which is commas that are needed and when you have commas that are not needed. Let's look at the comma first. First of all, punctuation is intended to make your meaning clear. So be aware of the fact that you want the punctuation to help communicate meaning. That's its purpose. That's why you improve the most by correcting errors in your own writing. First of all, a comma, it lets the reader know that there is a pause. It lets the reader know when they need to look at things differently. Stop, pause, end of part of an idea, beginning of the next. So let's look at when we use them. We use a comma in between independent clauses that are joined by a coordinating conjunction. As a rule, you do not use a comma to separate coordinate word groups that are not independent clauses, which is P2A. It's a common error. You use a comma when there is an independent clause, comma, a coordinating conjunction, the fanboys, and a second independent clause. If your paper was marked with P1A, that indicates that there should have been a comma there based on this rule. If your paper was marked P2A, that meant you should not have had a comma there based on this rule because they are coordinating elements but not independent clauses. P2B applies to introductory phrases or clauses. We come to a natural pause after a dependent clause and after a series, after a participial phrase, and also sometimes when we have two or more prepositional phrases together. So a comma tells the reader that the introductory phrase or clause has come to a close and that the main part of the sentence is about to begin. There is a natural pause here, so common sense can help you to determine when you need a comma. Non-restrictive elements are elements that are not necessary for the meaning of the sentence. And this is a little confusing, I always feel, but think about if you take that phrase or clause out, that non-restrictive element, the sentence can still stand and mean what you intended for it to mean. Look at the example under non-restrictive. It says the scientist who represented 8 different universities met to review applications. We don't need to know that they represented 8 universities to understand why they met. If you look at the restrictive at the restrictive phrases or elements, clauses or phrases, commas are not necessary. Campers need clothes, not just any kind of clothes, but clothes that are durable. Scientists who study the Earth's structure are geologists, not just any scientists. So they restrict the meaning of the word they modify. Notice that typically begins a restrictive element, which and who may go either way, but typically we find that which begins a non-restrictive element. P1F is transitional and parenthetical expressions, absolute phrases, which we'll discuss later, and words groups that express contrast. Again, notice that you have a natural pause. As a matter of fact, natural foods are not always salt-free. Celery, for example, evolution, as far as we know, the bass weighed about 20 pounds, give or take a few ounces. These are expressions that we put in to qualify the meaning. We call them parenthetical. An absolute phrase modifies the sentence. Notice what it looks like. Elvis Presley made music industry history in the 50s. His records have sold more than 10 million copies. Notice that this modifies rather than standing alone. Again, it depends on your meaning, and that's why it's important for you to correct your own paper. When it expresses contrast, the same thing is true. Unlike Robert, Celia loved dance contests. The Epicurean philosophers sought mental, not bodily pleasures. Parenthetical expressions are set off by commas. Typically, there is a natural pause. P1G is conventional uses. Nouns of direct address, when you call someone by name. You also, when you say yes and no. When we have what they call interrogative tags, wasn't it? When we use direct quotations, we separate the direct quotation from the rest of the sentence with a comma. Notice that the comma comes at the end of the introductory information. It comes inside the closing quotation mark when it goes there. And interestingly, we have a comma after a date. That's considered to be a conventional use. I always thought it's an odd rule. With addresses, we use them to designate the end, also the end of the address, not just in between. And we may do it for titles. And sometimes we need commas just so it prevents confusion. All of the catastrophes that we had faced might happen, happened. A patient who can walk up and, patients who can walk up and down the hall several times a day. Again, the idea is that the comma is there to help your reader know when you have a pause. When you have a pause in thought, and so that they can organize the thoughts and understand the relationships easily.